Hello, everyone. My name is Maya Natarajan, and I'll be your host for this webinar. Today, we're kicking off a new series of webinars on content intelligence. So for the next 3 months, we'll have our guests present content intelligence solutions that they've implemented within their organizations. To kick this off, we're very pleased to have our featured guests, Diglio Simoni from RTI International and Jeannine Bartlett from our partners, Earley Associates. They'll be joined by our very own Toby Conrad, and we'll be discussing content intelligence for knowledge acquisition and reuse. So let me start off with some background information on our speakers. First, Diglio Simoni. Diglio Simoni is a senior high-performance computing scientist in the Research Computing Division at RTI International. He began his career at NASA JPL and then at NASA Ames Research Center. His academic training is in computer science, life sciences, neuroscience, physics, and mathematics. Simoni specializes in the use of technologically advanced methodologies, especially high-performance computing, artificial intelligence, natural language processing, advanced visualization techniques, and web-based solutions for the design and implementation of a wide variety of projects in scientific data manipulation, analysis, and interpretation. Next, we have Jeannine Bartlett from Earley Associates. Jeannine is VP and Chief Solutions Architect at Earley Associates. Jeannine helps clients gain competitive advantage by successfully leveraging information architecture with a keen understanding of emerging technologies, market dynamics, customer needs, pragmatic implementation approaches, and financial viability. She has over 20 years of experience leading research and development, market requirements, user-accessible interface design, and corporate strategy at both startup and public companies, spanning enterprise search and discovery, security and compliance, data-driven marketing, rich internet applications, data warehousing technologies, and other products and services. And finally, we have our very own Toby Conrad, who really needs no introduction since we've had him as our guest speaker for most of our webinars. Toby Conrad has been a senior consultant with Smartlogic for many years and has advised organizations such as NASA, Bank of America, Royal Bank of Scotland, BNP Paribas, Oxy, Autodesk, and many others on enterprise semantics for search, content management, and business process. Okay, so let me go through some housekeeping really quickly. Our webinar today will extend for approximately 45 minutes with about 10 minutes at the end for questions. You can participate in this webinar in 2 ways. Obviously, you can listen to our speakers, and we also encourage you to ask questions during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Please feel free to get your questions into the Q&A section in the lower corner of the dialog box anytime during this webinar. We will also make a recording of this webinar available in about 48 hours from now. As always, I'd like to start off the webinar with a quick introduction to Smartlogic, who we are and what we do, although I'm sure most of you are very familiar with this now. Smartlogic is a software company that specializes in content intelligence. Smartlogic Semaphore is a content intelligence platform that identifies, classifies, extracts, analyzes, and surfaces unstructured information based on its meaning and context, enabling enterprises to make timely and informed business decisions. Semaphore complements an organization's investments in best-of-breed applications such as enterprise search, content management, and business process to provide rapid and accurate access to unstructured content so that they can better find, organize, process, monetize, control, and govern this valuable asset. Hundreds of organizations like RTI, of course, NASA, Bank of America, Autodesk, Oxy, Ford Foundation, Intel, Pearson Education, SAIC, and many others use Smartlogic today. Without further ado, let's get started. So I'd like to now turn the webinar over to Toby, who will open the discussion with what content intelligence solutions are and how to effectively use them to enhance your information systems, content management systems like SharePoint, OpenText, Documentum, and so on and so forth, and search systems like the Google Search Appliance, Microsoft Fast, Solar, and many more, with navigational taxonomies, ontologies, and automated classification. Welcome, Toby, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Maya, and good morning or good afternoon to everybody on the call today. So I've got a short presentation today which should really set the context for the RTI project overall, and to help explain what content intelligence is, focus on a particular application of content intelligence that we call knowledge acquisition and reuse, to talk about the business goals and how to go about achieving them. Okay, so what is content intelligence? As Maya pointed out earlier, it's all about identifying the content that you have within the enterprise, finding the content that really has value, classifying it in a consistent way, extracting value from that content, providing business analytics from that content, and being able to surface the information that's most useful for users to be able to perform their tasks more efficiently, make better decisions, and ultimately support clients. There are many different applications for content intelligence. One of them, which we're going to focus on today, is about surfacing the right knowledge for people in order to complete tasks and make decisions. The content intelligence can also be about targeting the right information to end users and to customers based on their needs, about being able to better control and govern your content in order to reduce risk, to reduce cost, but also to make sure that content is properly protected and secured. And lastly, to improve the self-service experience so that more customers and employees can take care of their own needs and thereby get better service and reduce costs for the organization. As I said, we're going to focus in on knowledge acquisition and reuse. So what are the business goals for this? Well, we've identified 6 major goals. The first is to really maximize the use of content assets that already exist. In other words, to reduce the amount of time that people are reinventing or reproducing the same content. Secondly, to be able to get the right content and knowledge to people so that they make better decisions and perform tasks more efficiently. Thirdly, it's not just about connecting people with content, but it's also about connecting people with other people, people who have expertise or experience or resources in order to complete some kind of task. And in doing so, we can increase the amount of collaboration and sharing that goes on within the organization. We also want to reduce the chances of repeating mistakes from the past. In other words, sharing lessons learned. And lastly, simply to reduce the amount of time that people are spending searching for the information that they need. So those are the business goals. How do we go about achieving them? So all we need to do is identify key groups of people that require unstructured content in order to do their work properly. And having identified those groups of people, to really work out what are the important tasks that they're doing and what kind of content is necessary for people to complete those tasks. So different people within the enterprise will have clearly different requirements. People in sales will be interested in what work we've done for clients before, where we've had similar bids in the past, what's made the difference between winning and losing, what the competition are offering and how we can go about winning against that competition. Whilst people in the call center will be interested in how particular problems or client requirements have been solved or met in the past, what information needs to be gathered, who to talk to, what procedures should be followed in order to complete the call. People in the product development area may be much more interested in what the market requires, how other products have been received by the market, what competition is doing, how problems have been solved in other situations. So each of these groups of people will have different requirements for content, and it's important to be able to understand those requirements so that we can go on and organize the content properly. So having got a picture of how the content needs to be organized, that helps us to identify the types of metadata that we need to apply to the content. In other words, how should we tag up the content so we can retrieve exactly what is required when it is needed. And determining that helps us to define the structure for your taxonomy or ontology so that we know exactly what to apply to the content. Now that we know how to describe the content, we actually have to go ahead and do that, to catalogue the content which you have. Now, one approach to do that is to ask users to manually tag up the content. There really is a number of problems with this. Firstly, business users are somewhat busy as it is and really don't want to be burdened. Even if they do attempt to do it, it's likely to be done in a somewhat incomplete and inconsistent fashion. And should anything change in the way that you need to tag up content in the future because requirements change or the business evolves, then you're going to have to go back to users and ask them to tag again. So a much better approach is to use technology that can analyze the content, determine what it is and what it is about, and automatically tag it up, re-tag it up if required in the future. Now, the content itself may live in many different repositories around the enterprise, particularly content management systems, document management systems, SharePoint, records management, CRM, and so on and so forth. So it's a necessary part of the auditing process to understand where this content is, and from that to determine when metadata is going to be applied and where metadata is going to be applied. Now, most of the clients that we see still have a lot of content stored in shared folders and file shares. And it tends to be vast in quantities and going back some period of time. A good approach for this is to classify all of that content to determine what it actually is. And then you can take a number of different strategies. So the content that really has no value, that's just a waste of money storing and managing it. And equally, there may be content that you don't have to keep, but in some way represents a risk to the organization. So, for example, in the event of future litigation, that content may be a risk or may just increase the cost of defending against that litigation. So being able to delete and archive away the content that you shouldn't or don't want to have is a good first step. For the content that's left, some of it will be of some value, not great value necessarily. And for the content that has some value, the best thing to do is to index that with a search engine, and as it's indexed, to classify it again so you know what you have. And that allows people to find that content at any point in the future. But amongst all of this content as well, there may be some content which is very valuable. And the best thing to do with that content is to migrate it into a content management system or SharePoint or something of that nature so that you can really get the most value out of that content going forward. Now, once you've associated content with the topics and nodes in your taxonomies and ontologies, it's valuable to associate people with them as well. You may already have some existing data which associates people with particular areas of expertise. But this can be supplemented by mining the content in order to find out who's involved with particular products, services, job functions, systems, or whatever else is valuable. And also, you can perform analysis on the content that people are searching for, consuming, and sharing in order to further supplement that information. And all of that information can be captured and incorporated into the ontology so that people can find other people very quickly and easily. From a technology perspective, there are three key ingredients to this. The first is that you need a platform for efficiently building your ontology, and to make sure that's properly controlled and governed, so production systems are properly maintained, and that the performance of the ontology is optimized because it aligns well with the content and it aligns well with the needs of your user communities. The second element is to be able to automatically text mine and classify all of the content. And the platform should make it easy to do that within your existing and legacy systems, content and document management systems, SharePoint and so on, but also that it can be incorporated into your search engine indexing. So any content that isn't properly managed, so file shares and external sites and data sources, can be automatically classified as well. The end result being consistent metadata across all of your content. And then the third element is to be able to use the metadata and the ontology to maximize the quality of the experience for end users. The end user experience itself should make it easy for users to find content, and therefore will necessarily have to be customized a little bit for your organization and the roles and tasks that people are performing. Because they can find content easily, the user interface can make it possible to increase reusing and repurposing of content, to be able to find people quickly and easily, and to be able to explore connections and topics within and beyond the enterprise. So in conclusion, content intelligence enables people to find people and content quickly and efficiently, improve reuse, improve learning, share and make better use of content, improve the decision making. And if the project is run in a proper way, then it's possible to start by targeting the most valuable use cases and business scenarios to demonstrate success very quickly, and then to use that as a platform for future growth. So that's the end of my short presentation, and now I'll hand over to Diglio and to Jeannine to talk about how this actually happened at RTI. Thanks, Toby.
Thank you, Toby. This is Jeannine Bartlett, Earley Associates here. Earley Associates and Smartlogic began working with RTI International several months ago to roll out a knowledge acquisition project, really enterprise side. And so Diglio and I would like to walk you through what that project looked like, both from the standpoint of how we worked through the pilot and our objectives there, but also some of the end results of actually working with users both during the pilot and afterwards to not only have them adopt knowledge acquisition across the board at RTI, but helping us to adapt what we were doing to make sure they did it efficiently. So Diglio, I think, is going to cover how that even got started in the first place. There was a period, of course, of building a business case for enterprise findability.
That's right.
There at RTI.
So we'll start with sort of laying out the groundwork and sort of the initial impetus for this tool. RTI is a research organization. We've been around for about 50 years, and we've been gathering electronic information about our research for many, many years. As we all know, we're all swimming in data, and so research organizations such as RTI, where having access to these data is a principal interest, we realized that many of these data reside in various silos across the organization. So, ironically, it's vital to find this information because of the way organizations grow over time. Very often, this information is hidden, so they become hidden resources. And also, the nature of information at RTI is very cyclical, not only in terms of what might be important at any point in time in terms of research results, but also in terms of what's fundable at any point in time. So finding information that is resonant in our archives is very important. So we wanted to present a tool. We wanted to develop a tool that will increase the efficiency of our staff in terms of responding to opportunities, finding collaborations, reusing content, finding data sets that we could use to put in our proposals, and also write better reports. So we used two major use cases to drive the design of the system. These certainly are not the only two use cases, but the most important ones. The first one, which we call an array search, is a situation where we have knowledge of a particular piece of data existing at RTI, but we simply don't know where the data might be. And the second one is what we call a broadening search, which is a case where we're sort of starting some exploratory analysis of a new market area or new research topic, and we want to ask sort of basic questions that Toby mentioned before, such as who has solved this problem before, what was found before, what results do we get in any particular direction. And so we needed a system that combined the ability to find this information. So for that, we chose the Google Search Appliance, sort of as an initial step, even though we realized right in the beginning that the search is not the issue. The search is organization of the content, as well as Semaphore. And the reason we chose Semaphore is because it allows us to, one, principally grow an ontology to meet the needs of the organization, something that is extremely important because it carries through not only in terms of search, but also nowadays is becoming pervasive in terms of organizing all content at RTI. The second component is that Smartlogic is really agnostic with respect to the search engine layer. And so given that our intent was not to replace all search systems at RTI, but instead coexist with everything that exists at RTI already, we needed something that integrated well it interoperated. In fact, theirs is touted as this external system, so it's not in competition with any of the other systems as drawn in this figure, but instead provides a central access point so that investigators can go through all these systems that have been developed over time and have a one-stop shop trying to find content across the silos.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out on this slide that a lot of these systems were actually file shares even, and there were some pieces of content that could be accessed through RTI's internal portal. In some cases, you had to go through specific systems to get at it, and in some cases, it was fairly loosely arranged on file shares. So there was a big combination of not only types of content, but locations for the content as well.
That's right. So in terms of how we use the Semaphore software stack, clearly the three elements here are extremely important. The first one on top of this pyramid is this triangle is this ability to create semantically rich structures to categorize the information. And again, this is important because we needed a system that would allow us to grow this ontology organically, allowing different people, different experts in different research units to provide recommendations regarding how to grow the ontology. And Semaphore does this very well in terms of allowing us to build, manage, and deploy vocabularies that meet the expectations of the various stakeholders. In terms of classification, we needed something that would do this automatically without having to invest further time or effort, trying to go back, often decades, and trying to understand what the data are all about. So once you have this ontology, then we can very quickly pull up results and put them in categories that then can be exposed to the user. And that's the third component, which is this very well designed semantic enhancement server, which allows us to build a front ends that are appropriate to our needs. And in fact, we will continue to use this, and the next iteration of the system will probably have sort of search-driven tools that build upon not only the ability to search, but the ability to build dashboards that use the content to provide further refinement regarding questions that particular stakeholders might have.
Yeah, a couple more points about this slide. Just the ability to, from a single ontology manager client, have taxonomy structures and ontologies that not only will allow you to classify content, but also really help drive the user experience is kind of important to think about. You're really able to leverage both on both sides. And the other thing I would point out here is that we weren't actually moving the content anywhere, and we're not tagging it in place. In this scenario, what we're doing is applying those ontology and classification rules, and then simply building the index, in this case in the Google search appliance. So it's really very much a leave the content in place in these separate places, and yet index it and move it forward and be able to expose it through a user interface in a very different way from their native systems.
That's right.
So a little bit about how we went through the pilot and what we did both pre-launch and post-launch in terms of scoping this out and planning and all the sessions that we went through. We, of course, wanted to pay a lot of attention to not only the content itself that we were going to expose, but the individual users and user groups and how they would react to this kind of approach. You'll see kind of a waterfall methodology here. We were doing a lot of examination both of the content and potential organizing principles. Those individual focus groups I'd like to call your attention to, and this is always sort of iterative. You're going to classify, you're going to test out your ontologies and expose them through user interfaces over time in an iterative fashion, and it grows over time, and knowledge does evolve, so this is something you'll get used to. But we also wanted to make sure that we had a good baseline test of what the users were capable of in their current environments on their existing systems. We wanted to test out how well the ontology worked for them, just in terms of does it resonate, does it make sense to them, how would they use it without even looking at the content. And then finally, we focused on a large live test of potential users right after the launch period. And that was more of a, think of it as an A/B test, looking at how well could they accomplish tasks in their current systems versus what they could do with theirs. And that was going to give us clues as to how well it could be adopted and how well we could adapt it to their needs. So a bit about the pilot period and looking for organizing principles. You know, all these search systems will allow you to access content, but to really have content intelligence, you have to tell them how to organize it. And so most of what we do during this period is to build that up. Not only the organizing principles into a framework that makes sense, and doing all the taxonomy development behind the scenes, but also looking at socialization, at training, at governance procedures for keeping the topics fresh. All of these bake into a sustainable findability, because as I said, knowledge evolves, so you have to keep after it over time. As user needs change, as the content changes, really as the world changes around you. When we looked at the types of facets we would need to put together for the ontology, they came from a lot of different areas. RTI covers many different research areas. We also have many geographic locations in play, not only for RTI itself, but for some of the subject matter. And, of course, we have proposals going on and services capabilities we need to look for, organizations we would look for, and people expertise. So it was very much a multifaceted approach to putting together an ontology that could be used to zero in on any one or multiple portions of those subject areas. And we really spent quite a bit of time doing that. We did workshops and interviews, obviously, to try to derive some themes here. And not surprising what we came out with, many of these takeaways are going to be common in any organization. Perhaps a key issue here were confidence factors in the content within each of those specific research areas. They really wanted to make sure that content was fresh and it was relevant and available to them. As I think in the past it had been just so difficult to find content within the organization, and they were used to going outside. We also usually ask about what would make this project a success for people, and you know, we got a number of really telling responses back and themes from that. The content hoarding one was interesting, and you'll find this in most organizations. Longer-term employees, they tend to keep the content close and reuse it. You know, if it's a proposal style they like, or a research article, or something from a past project, they're not as used to sharing, perhaps, as they're going to need to be in this new world. So that's one thing that you should watch for long-term content curatorship. But by and large, people thought that the biggest challenge might be just socialization and communicating the fact that this was even available. Change management culturally tends to be the biggest issue in these kind of projects, not surprisingly. So we have a couple of slides here just to show you what the interface looked like. Diglio, go ahead.
Yeah, so this is a couple snapshots of the tool on the screen that's shown to the users. We wanted to have a very streamlined front end. So just like Google, we have a simple entry box to start the search. Here we're already showing some of the elements of the ontology. So as people start putting in terms, some of the preferred terms in the ontology are shown as possible entry points to the information. So if you do a search here, in this case, in energy technology, if you go to the next slide, then you can see the full set of results. So on the left, you see some of the facets that were identified as being most important to RTI, including things like business topics, content types, those proposals, presentations, reports, what have you. RTI is a global organization, so geography is an important facet as well as organizations, so what kind of clients we have. Another important facet, which is really one of the key points here of RTI, of AIRS, is providing access to people. So when you do a search and trying to look for collaborators in a project or writing a paper, you often need to find travel experts. And so the people facet is extremely important for us, as well as obviously research topics. But this provides, like I said, a single entry point to various systems across RTI. And so with that, you can connect with other experts. You can solely avoid duplicating content because you can very quickly find it. And in summary, make your time in front of the computer much more efficient. This is evidenced by some of the comments we got from initial users. In particular, one that caught my attention is this aha moments that people have. So often when you're doing research, clearly you can go to different silos, but if you put all the information together in one screen, then people can build correlations in their minds and find linkages between disparate sets of information and provide insights into whatever topic you have at hand.
Yeah, I think this really illustrates well the two different use cases that we started out with. It's one thing to be trying to find a needle in a haystack to narrow in on search, but quite another to expose people to the possibilities of discovery across systems. And a lot of these comments, I think, really relate to that, because the systems just operate in a very different and intuitive way. So we launched, we went live with this, and while we had focused on a relatively small set of users through the pilot period, we wanted to make sure that across the board, across RTI's many different research areas and types of user communities, that we could have similar adoption results and aha moments and keep it fresh for people. So we structured up a set of user test scenarios. Some of them were simple single tasks, in other words, tasks that you could probably answer by going to any one of the systems they already had, and some of them were more like compound tasks. Either they would have to go to more than one location to be able to answer the question, or they're more of a discovery question in nature. And some of you may laugh at that top single task up there, finding the RTI holiday schedule. Not surprisingly, that probably was the #1 question from the search logs that people asked of an internal portal. We threw it in as kind of a litmus test. We wanted to make sure that our user focus groups could complete a very simple query on both their existing systems as well as the new AIR system, just to build confidence. And of the 19 users, split into 3 different groups that we brought into this test, most of them had never even used AIRS. So they were familiar with their existing systems, but not familiar with the AIR system yet. So the results of this A/B test were pretty interesting, both collectively as well as in terms of breaking it down by user communities and the different types of users. One of the ways we looked at this was just the ability to complete a task. So each of those test scenarios, we tracked to see whether or not users could even find what they were looking for at all. We gave them about 5 minutes on each of these tasks to go through it. And an interesting point, I mean, these are the type of questions that couldn't easily be answered by their existing systems. So you'll see only about half of the people could answer all of the questions or complete even the tasks across all those 6 tasks, whereas over 70% could do it using errors. And that's without having had any prior exposure to errors at all. So overall users were about 30% more likely, 27% more likely to be able to complete a task, even the compound task, using errors than with the systems that they were supposedly used to. So that's pretty telling, actually. We also, at the end of each of those tasks, asked them to rate their satisfaction with their results. So both in the case of their existing systems as well as with errors, we took a look at it, and overall, that's for all of the questions. People were about 20% more satisfied with theirs and the way that it worked and the way they were able to get at information than they were with the incumbent systems. But breaking it down, you'll see they actually, surprisingly, were even rating it on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest, well over 4 for satisfaction, even on the simplest tasks, and with the compound tasks, again, an even broader margin here, really preferred working with the error system than with their existing systems. So those were looking at the types of users altogether. And when you started breaking apart, what did this mean to the different user groups that we have recruited for this, you got some much more interesting results. We recruited 3 different types. New hires, people who were relatively new to RTI, and RTI is fortunate to have people who work for them and stay there for a very long time in research. So new hires were an interesting category because the recruitment costs and getting them up to speed with so many different experts and so many different topic areas throughout RTI is a big challenge for them to overcome. They did very, very well with theirs. Perhaps it's because they're used to federated search systems or these kind of faceted search interfaces, but they really preferred and completed 2 to 1 more tasks and higher satisfaction on errors than the existing single systems, even though they spent about an equal amount of time on the tasks in each of the sides. So new hires did very well with it. Another group that we recruited specifically were proposal writers. And these are the folks at RTI who spend the majority of their time when they're writing proposals and researching for proposals, knee-deep and sometimes neck-deep in the existing systems. So they're very, very used to working with the systems that RTI has other than theirs. So for them, I mean, these are the power users on the existing systems. They slightly preferred errors. And they even completed more tasks using errors than with their original systems. They spent almost twice the amount of time there, and we think that may have been because they were not used to this idea that they could do discovery rather than search. So it was a very interesting group to look at, very task-oriented. The researchers were the third group that we really recruited for this test, and researchers at RTI in the past either were looking outside of RTI in many cases for their information, either through Google or Yahoo, or they had research assistants to help them nail down and find the information they were looking for. So they're a very interesting group to try to make more self-sufficient and to leverage within RTI as well. And they seem to like both systems equally, yet when you really look at it and break it down, they were able to complete far more tasks using errors than with the usual systems in half the time. So what was going on with those guys? We think that they were just delighted to find out that the content existed within RTI, and from a satisfaction standpoint, but from an actual task completion standpoint, and time on task, they were far more productive using the error system. So this amounted to a couple of different types of takeaways. When we look at content intelligence and how you need to keep it evergreen and keep it fresh, you're looking at it from two different perspectives. The first perspective is really about improving search iteratively over time, and this is something that you'll get used to. You want to improve search, your ontologies, your content, and that largely depends on understanding your audiences and what their needs are and how they change over time. There's a second half really about selling search and selling content intelligence back to the organization that Diglio will cover. The big takeaways for us in terms of the different types of users we had were that the newbies, they were a great ROI case because they were almost immediately effective at finding and reusing knowledge across the organization using content intelligence like what Smartlogic provides. For the old-timers, in this case researchers who've been around for a long time, their key needs seem to be keeping the content both clean and fresh in the way you access it, the way you look for it, and keeping things simple. And they were far more productive by keeping those design aspects in mind. And finally, your power users, in the RTI case, the proposal writers, they might be the hardest to please when search isn't working. But if you keep things task-oriented and realize, just how big a champion they can wind up being for you, you can wind up with some very sophisticated results of knowledge reuse. Diglio, on building confidence within the executive team.
Yeah, so certainly that was one of the sort of struggles that we've had because I think it's always might be pretty obvious that search is important. It's often the case that for various reasons people are reticent to expose a lot of data for some of the reasons that we talked about before in terms of perhaps data hoarding. So having support of the organization at large when the highest levels was extremely important in moving this pilot through. But I think once we were able to provide very quick wins and show immediate results with very little effort initially, I think things went much smoother after that. So in summary, in this modern environment of web-hosted content where at RTI we can instantly access vast amounts of information both inside and outside RTI, the competitive value of a journal article or report or a collaboration is increasingly derived from our ability to connect such information with not only other content, but also with information about fellow experts who might be important to whatever you're doing. So we believe that ERS illustrates how the concepts behind content intelligence can be used to leverage taxonomies and ontologies to transform electronic assets into semantically rich resources. And so certainly this ability to create instant connections between pieces of information that have been to date kept separate or siloed represents a revolution in the way RTI users can search for and consume information. ERS has effectively improved the overall user experience in our enterprise by becoming a hub, sort of a single one-stop shop, connecting all content at RTI so that our scientists can go directly to the appropriate resources, often bypassing system-centric interfaces because it aggregates pieces of information that reside in disparate places within the organization. ERS certainly empowers users to find additional content, additional value within the content that resides within our internet. In summary, ERS goes beyond search and browsing by exposing the power of semantic relationships that enable discovery, that enable the connecting with fellow scientists, places, events, research results, by allowing us to repurpose content to create targeted resources for specific research needs, and to enable links to ideas and data sets that might not be immediately apparent, therefore facilitating the formation of networks of researchers who are better equipped to produce the type of impactful results that we strive to provide to our clients. Maya?
Okay, thank you very much, Diglio and Jeannine. I think having you present as a tag team really worked well in this situation. It's, I always say it's always great to hear a customer's perspective and the challenges they overcame. So I appreciate your sharing the RTI story with us. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Toby for a very comprehensive presentation on content intelligence and how to use it effectively within an organization. It really set the stage up for Jeannine's and Diglio's presentation. Okay, so now that we've had the presentation, I'd actually like to open the webinar to questions. Please use the Q&A window in the lower corner of the webinar dialog screen. I see that there are already a few questions in the queue, so if you have questions, please make sure that you get your thoughts in as soon as possible. Let me get started off with the first question. This one's Jeannine Diglio question. A common problem is that people don't have access to the silos in the first place. How did you deal with access control restrictions in each of the silos?
Right, so that's an interesting question because often the systems, when they're built initially, have very stringent access controls for whatever particular application or set of stakeholders. So, I mean, that goes down to back to the question of serialization and making sure that people understand that we're not building a replacement, but we're instead building something that is compatible with the systems at hand. So we certainly reused all the access controls because we need to pay attention to that clearly. But while doing that, we were able to sort of provide access to the resources and only invoke access control mechanisms when the user is ready to click on a link, therefore providing at least information that an electronic asset exists without giving immediate access. So it's only when the person clicks on a link that if authentication is required that it's invoked at that point.
Excellent. Jeannine, any thoughts on this, or?
Well, it's a topic that comes up a lot. It's one of the benefits of leaving content in place and running indexing over it is just as Diglio mentioned, you're able to take advantage of the existing data security and identity and access authentication requirements that you've got in place. It's a very different set of issues when you try to actually migrate content and you're migrating them into new systems and trying to expose them. And that's if that is your situation, then that's a totally different design issue and security issue. So you have to sort of rethink how you're going to expose content and look at both the sensitivity of the content itself, which can be something that can be addressed through auto-classification, by the way, as well as who has enough sensitivity and clearance to see it. So really, that becomes more of an issue when you're trying to migrate content.
Thank you. This is a question for, I guess it's a question for Jeannine. What does the Stockholm Syndrome mean in this context?
Yeah, it's Stockholm Syndrome, of course, says that you're, if you were a captive or a hostage, you wind up in the end enjoying, or maybe not so much enjoying, but liking the scenario that you're in. For me, for example, I was really great at Microsoft Excel back in the Office 2005 days, and as soon as 2007 came out, I suddenly felt completely out of depth, out of my depth entirely, and it's just because we get used to operating the way we like to operate with existing tools. So when you're going to come up with some resistance from some people who have become experts at the older systems that you're replacing. And that's really what we meant by this. It's a lot to overcome to think about adopting a new way of looking at the same information. And so that's probably your biggest design challenge, is to work with user groups who've been extreme experts in other ways of getting at their data.
Yes, thank you. I guess change is always very difficult.
So. It can be. It's back to the change management issue, cultural change as well as system change.
Right. The next question is for Toby. What languages does Semaphore support?
We support about 26 different languages at the moment. Most of the major ones are covered in there. That's in terms of being able to firstly detect what language content is in, and then to apply appropriate stemming and tokenization to deal with that language. The Ontology Manager itself can support any language, and we support rich character sets and both right to left and left to right languages.
Okay, thank you. This next question is an interesting question, and I guess it's maybe a Toby or a Jeannine question. Do you need to develop a curriculum to educate people on what ontologies are? This is a challenge for us, and really the main thing is the main challenge is to convey the value. Any ideas?
Well, that could be a loaded question. I suppose there are just so many different audiences that question could apply to. Hopefully, for your end user community, for the people that you're actually building the search experience for, they don't need to necessarily understand ontology at all. What they need to understand is whether or not this intuitively works for them. So that's not to say that you shouldn't provide training on how to really leverage the tool and the techniques to use to get at it, but they shouldn't have to know ontology. For the people who are actively maintaining the ontologies and taxonomies within the system, then yes, I do feel like the training curriculums really do help. Certainly we advise having a broader governance committee actually work with the topics and how to add new topics, which new topics would be important. But the change management pieces, it does help to have a training program where you understand ontology. But the third audience here is really the selling up issue, which is upper management, executive management. How do you get them to see the value of it? And I'm not sure that they need to understand that it even is ontology. Frankly, they need to see that the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. So what would you add to that, especially that last point?
Yeah, I mean, it depends very much from one business to another, and I think that's why we like to talk about the applications rather than the ontology itself. So, is it about productivity? Is it about reducing the cost of managing all of this content and stopping that cost continuing to spiral in the future? Is it about providing a better service to clients? And only by taking those different applications and trying to work out the value of those can you really demonstrate the value of an ontology. Otherwise, it's just too abstract.
And if I may add, Celia, from the point of RTI, when we present the tool to various users, we mention ontologies as sort of the back end, but really when we talk about how to use the tool, we sort of stop at the level of filters. So think of these facets that we expose on the left-hand side of the search tool as ways of either further refining your search or broadening it depending on what you're searching for. So we talk about them as filters so that we don't have to tell them exactly how the ontology is built, but we just certainly need to express the power in using them.
Thank you. I think, and I hope this explained how you can educate people on what ontologies are. There was a follow-up statement to that. We're trying to get funding and need to sell the need to invest in this ontology area. So, if not, please send us an email, and I think we can expand upon our answer. I think we have time for one last question, and I think this is a Diglio question. What are the advantages of rule-driven categorization for your particular corpora?
That's a very good question. In fact, that was one of the key elements of us choosing Smartlogic over other tools. Whereas other categorization tools may be sort of black box approaches where you have a neural net or some generic algorithm, something that provides categorization, but sort of how it does it is hidden. For us, it was extremely important to be able to go inside the inners of the system and be able to define rules, because often in science, different terms might be used differently. So we needed ways of further refining when terms are chosen and how documents are categorized according to those terms. So the system has very, very finely grained mechanisms for defining these categories, and so for us, this component of Semaphore was crucial.
Okay, thank you. At this point, we're really out of time for this webinar. I'd like to thank our guests, Diglio Simoni, Jeannine Bartlett, and Toby Conrad for a very informative webinar, and of course, our audience for being actively involved with questions. If you have any other questions or would like to discuss this topic in greater detail, please email us at marketing@smartlogic.com, and we'll make sure we get back to you. We'll also try and put answers to all the questions that you've asked on our website at some later point. Of course, we will have a recording of this webinar in about 48 hours. So keep your eyes posted for a link for this webinar on demand. I just want to finish off by saying we recently carried out a survey at the Taxonomy Bootcamp / SharePoint Symposium in Washington, D.C. in November, and we have the results of the survey available as a download on our website. Very interesting results. I encourage you to take a look at the survey. And one quick reminder before we leave, please mark your calendars for January 25th, 2012. That's next year. Again, the date is January 25, 2012, for our next webinar in the same series, Content Intelligence for Micro-Targeting and Distribution. Our guest will be Evelyn Kent from McClatchy Tribune. And on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. Have a safe and pleasant holiday season.